Hello, I'm Paul Larson. People living in the North Country of New York State may know Kathy Baumgarten's offbeat and often funny column, Jabberwocky, in the Lake Champlain Weekly paper. In this author visit, she talks about one of the quirky characters who has populated her life and her home. She's written about him in a book called Strictly a Loner. Recently, you had a non-fiction book published called Strictly a Loner, and it's about when your family moved to Plattsburgh and found a house to live in. What kind of house was it?
We didn't realize at the time, but it was a rooming house. It had been, the people that had owned it previously rented rooms out for many, many years, since the 1950s. They'd been renting rooms.
I understand you brought a special object with you.
I did. After we bought the house, we found the original rooming house sign in the garage, and it's really pretty beautiful and very vintage looking.
And not only did you not know that it was a rooming house you were buying, but it also came with a boarder already in it.
It did. Earl didn't want to move out. He'd been renting rooms for a long, long time, and he didn't want to live any other way, and he went around town, and he couldn't find a rooming house as good as the one he was already in, so he wanted to stay put. And that was kind of an unusual request for us, as you can probably imagine.
So how did you decide to let him stay?
We tried to get to know him a little bit beforehand. Having someone come live in your home with you is can be kind of a scary thing to contemplate, and so we took some time getting to know him first before we let that go.
Now, how long had Earl lived in the house as a boarder?
He had lived there already, I think, about possibly 6 or 7 years before, when we had bought the house. He'd already been living there quite a while, so he didn't want to go.
And when he asked to stay in the house, what was your reaction? Because I know initially you weren't really planning on having a boarder.
No, we weren't. We hadn't thought about it. And he came over to where we were living. He found us, and he came and he asked me. And my first thought, I'm a very private person, was like, what? I can't believe somebody would be asking a question like that. And then I said, well, let's talk to my husband too. And we decided to have him over for dinner and get to know him a little bit. And we made that decision to let him stay and see how that worked.
What was different about Earl right off the bat?
Well, the first thing that was how alone he was, and for being an elderly person, and that he seemed to be hoarding a lot of stuff. We moved him. He had a room upstairs, and we moved him. We wanted him to move downstairs, and everything wasn't going to fit. And he had a lot of things he had to get rid of, that we made him get rid of. And he was saving some very unusual items, I think.
Yeah, what kind of belongings did he have in that room?
He had paper bags full of folded paper bags. He had paper bags full of paper napkins left over from fast food restaurants. He had paper bags full of bank pens, bundled in tens and wrapped with a rubber band, and bags full of old newspapers and bank statements. And he was a hoarder, and I'd never run into anyone quite like that before.
Didn't he also save ketchup and mustard packets?
He did. When you go to fast food, you always grab a handful, and he didn't throw them out like other people do. He would keep them. He kept extra straws and salt packets and sugar packets and mustard and ketchup. And when he moved into the room, he actually sent those extra things that didn't fit into his room into a storage unit. And he was paying to keep those things and maintain them. Those were his little treasure, and he wasn't about to part with them, even if he couldn't keep them in his room with him.
Now, he had a big secret.
He did.
What was it?
He did. He was actually a millionaire, and he lived like an absolute pauper. He was the kind of person that picked things up off the sidewalk, which I give reference to in the cover artwork in the book. He found a lot of things that way. And that was pretty surprising. I had never run into somebody. I didn't know how I felt about that. It seemed kind of dirty, but he would clean things up in the bathroom sink. And he wasn't dirty per se, but he was a hoarder.
So he was on his way to earning the $1 million. He didn't actually have it yet.
He'd made $1 million, and then the market turned at different points, and he lost it, and then he gained, and then he wanted to earn a second $1 million, and then maybe the market was turning. So, I don't know. I've never done a lot of investing, but that kind of thing happens a lot.
But as you said, he didn't live at all like a wealthy person. You wrote he measured his life in teaspoons. What does that mean?
He counted everything. I mean, everything that he bought or ate, he would measure how many uses he was going to get out of it. He bought a watch when he retired from the military in 1966, and it was a Rolex. And he did the math of how many years he'd had it and how many days of service he had out of it. And he actually figured out mathematically that it was less expensive to have that watch than to buy a less expensive one, because he still had his 20, 30 years later, where other people would have been through a couple of them already. So he counted everything. Food he would only buy if it was less than $1 a pound. He did mathematics on pads of paper and figured out the value of everything per minute.
He didn't have any books, he didn't have any paintings, he didn't have anything that most people would call luxuries?
He did not. He didn't have anything what you could call beautiful. He didn't have any artwork. He didn't even cut like pictures out of the free magazines or whatever and hang them on the wall. He didn't have any hobbies, and he didn't read books.
Did he have any indulgences?
I couldn't tell you if he did. It was so minor. Boy, I couldn't even tell you if he had a single one. Not one pops into my head. And it's interesting, a lot of books have been written about misers or millionaires or hoarders or whatever, but not many have been written by somebody who actually lived with somebody and got inside their little world. Earl was pretty private, but over 7 years I got to know him pretty well and spent a lot of time with him.
Well, let's hear a bit from your book.
I'd be glad to. I kept asking myself why old Earl rose from poverty and then reimposed it upon himself to acquire wealth for no good reason at all. It's not like he was going to send all his nieces and nephews through medical school or find a cure for cancer. So why bother? Didn't he trust himself to be able to stop and have an ice cream without losing all control? Did he talk himself out of wanting what other people had? Did he despise them? Or did he just end up doing this one thing all his life because nothing else ever panned out for him?
So he couldn't even indulge himself with one ice cream cone.
No. If we invited him out to have ice cream and cake, he'd have it, but if it was free, he would have it, but he wouldn't shell out money for it on his own.
So he was so intent on earning the $1 million through the stock market. What did you think he wanted to do with the $1 million?
I don't think he wanted to do anything with it. It was really a mystery to us. It was like it wasn't his money. It was like it was some purpose he'd turned his whole life over to. Really, I feel that the money owned him. He didn't really own it. It was its own entity that demanded everything from him and dictated to him every minute what he did every day. It controlled him. Trying to obtain that goal of $1 million absolutely controlled everything he did every day. Whether he put new socks on, whether he used a new razor blade so he could shave his beard, where he went, he measured every step by how close it was, how much money that was going to save him that day. It was a game to him to see how much money he could earn or save every day.
How did Earl change your life?
Over time, the effect that he had on our family was that he was sort of a substitute grandfather in some ways. Although he was kind of quirky, the kids accepted him. And we did. We take people for what they are. And my own father was a World War II veteran, and he passed away when I was very little. And he and Earl were actually almost the same age. And so sometimes I probably got kind of a more caring attitude toward Earl than a lot of people might have because of that fact. And we had a concern for him, and we learned a lot about issues that the elderly have in aging, dealing with money, the fears that they have. Earl shared those in common with a lot of people, and it helped me be more compassionate in that respect.
Well, that's a good thing.
Absolutely.
So Earl passed away in 1998. What happened to his $1 million?
Well, we were wondering what was going to happen to that money, too. And I think that I'm going to let your viewers stay on pins and needles like we were and read the book.
That's good advice.
Thank you.
Author Visits is a production of Mountain Lake PBS. For more information about the authors and their books, head to the Author Visit section of our website at mountainlake.org.